Hello everyone and welcome to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters across the franchised and independent dealer sectors.
Hello and welcome to this special Motor Trade Radio weekday podcast interview. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Michael Dunne, the US-based automotive author, entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and host of Driving With Dunne, the weekly podcast which takes a deep dive into the global automotive industry with a special focus on EVs. Now, Michael joins us from California, fresh from last week's 2025 Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. It's the biggest global event of its kind, which certainly over recent years has been increasingly used by car makers to showcase their latest EV models and tech. So welcome to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, Michael. I should imagine you clocked up quite a few miles at CES. Have you recovered yet?
Still in recovery. It is an amazing show, and I want to emphasize, when I went to the site this time to register, it now advertises itself, CES, as the world's most powerful conference, and there's every reason to believe that's true. There's exhibitors from over 160 countries, some 1,500 different companies, and the Chinese are in full force. They call it the Chinese Electronics Show, CES.
They've rebranded it, haven't they?
Yeah.
Yes. Optimism, high energy, lots of technology, AI, absolutely. Autonomous vehicles, yes. EVs, yes. Chinese, yes. That's what it felt like.
Fantastic. I mean, Michael, I follow everything you do. You know that. You know, what the Driving With Dunne and everything that you put out there. Just for some of the listeners that haven't had the pleasure yet of catching up with some of the output that you do you want to, before we get on to talk about CS, which will be one of our first questions, but do you want to just a brief background about you? Because, you know, it's fascinating and just to give them a flavour of why you know and involved so much with the Chinese marketplace.
Yes, there was a girlfriend involved.
Oh,
but we won't go there.
There always is, Michael.
Always a woman involved, but no. Grew up in Detroit, son of Jim Dunne, automotive editor for Popular Mechanics, and more well known, in fact, a legend, because he was the original car spy. So as a teenager, I drove the getaway car. He had his long lens Nikon camera to scout out and take pictures of future cars, whether it's at GM's proving grounds out there in Milford or Chrysler or Ford's. We were like spending afternoons driving through, standing, climbing trees, whatever it took to get the next generation car. So I was really hooked on cars from an early age, got to test drive virtually every make and model by the time I was 18. And then went to school at Michigan and did what every other Irish Catholic, one of 7 children in the family, does. And I studied Chinese. My parents were seriously worried. What have we done? What's gone wrong here? Our eldest son has gone off studying Chinese. So I did that for 4 years at Michigan, graduated, asked my dad, hey, everybody, all my colleagues at school, all my classmates are going to Ford, GM, or Chrysler to work. Where should I go? And he said, none of the above. Go to Asia and make something happen. So straight out of school in 1990, knowing no one, having no job set up, just took a flight and landed myself. What did Kipling call it? East of Suez, where the best is like the worst, where there ain't no 10 commandments and a man can raise a thirst. That really drew me to Asia originally, and it didn't disappoint. It was a phenomenal run. I spent the next 26 years there, starting a couple companies, having one acquired by J.D. Power. I ran J.D. Power. Later on, president of General Motors Indonesia. Deep, if you think about me, it's Asia and cars. That's been my life. And then one other point, about 8 years ago, with family, moved back to the United States and felt like California was exactly the right place to be because of the Elon Musk, because of the Waymos. This was the future, technology taking over the auto industry. So that's where I stand today here in San Diego, California, and advising automakers, suppliers in Europe, United States, and Asia about what's coming around the corner.
You have been warning them for a while, and I think they're now starting to realise that what you were talking about many years ago, what to watch out for and what's on the horizon, is actually now here, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. We've heard about technology taking over, software taking over, and it's real. At the show, if we can talk about the show for a moment, center stage was this brand called Zeekr, that's Generation Z Seeker, a subsidiary of Geely, which of course bought the Volvo brand, bought Lotus, owns a partnership in Proton, and now has developed this baby, beautiful young baby called Zeekr, sedans, vans, and a partnership with Waymo where they customize vehicles for Waymo use globally. So Zeekr was sort of the star of the show. There were others there, but just to give you a feeling, walking the floor of the show, funny thing happened on the first day. You know, we've all been to those shows, and after you walked a few miles, you get a little bit like, whoa, I'd kill for an espresso. So I'm walking by one of the Chinese automaker stands, and I happen to see, oh, good, look at that. They've got an espresso machine and a couple of young ladies behind ready to help out. So I started to move, and my ears, of course, are perked up. I start to move in their direction, and I hear in Chinese, one of them say to the other, oh no, here comes another foreigner looking for free coffee. And in Chinese, just for the benefit of people out there, Chinese, it was, yo, 来了一个外国人想喝咖啡. So I just thought that was a delicious moment, and I walked up and smiled and said to them, excuse me, and then I just repeated back what I had heard them say.
And that's is that the point?
Yeah. Each other just wanted to crawl into the floor in embarrassment. But
is that the point that all those years of learning Mandarin paid off in one go?
I was waiting for that moment. It was just perfect. Like, if I don't do anything, if a bus hits me tomorrow, I've accomplished a mission.
You've done it. Yeah. It's all paid off. All your learnings and schooling paid off just in that one moment in time.
Now, one, and I know our time is short with lots to cover, but one interesting, like fascinating thing that if you noticed, they said a foreigner wants, here comes another foreigner who wants coffee. Chinese people are the only people I know of who can be in a foreign country and still call the natives foreigners. That's how strong their culture is. So, yeah, that was what was happening.
Back to CES. I mean, you know, you talk about the flavor of that, you know, the CES, the rebrand. I mean, why do you think it is now, you know, one of the sort of the more important shows of the year? You know, we've got NADA coming up in the next week or so. There's been others. I mean, car makers now really are at the CES, and your opening point is really technology is at the forefront of everything that's happening.
That's right. The script has been transformed totally. So we know for 100 years it was the art of manufacturing vehicles, pounding metal into shape with glass and rubber and the rest, and just sculpturing a beautiful vehicle that we would drive or ride in. That was the Bible. That was the script. And now it's changed. It's an overused term, but it's actually true. Is we're driving computers that happen to sit on wheels, and as Li Shufu of Geely calls it, a couple sofas. So you've got a computer system, software powering that system, batteries, battery management systems, all that technology is just taking over the car. And this is really causing, what do you call it? Disruption doesn't even begin to describe it. Like an earthquake. The solid ground on which European American automakers, Japanese had worked for so long, for decades, is suddenly, oh my goodness, it's moving underneath our feet, and we don't have any. What's going on here? It's a shock.
And in terms of what caught your eye, I mean, we see some of the feedback coming out of some of the manufacturers, the OEMs that were there, the car makers that were there. But from your perspective, in the world of technology and what we're looking out for, what's caught your eye in terms of tech and product that is set to come this sort of year or so from some of these car makers?
The number one takeaway theme, I'd say, was AI. Everything was AI. Everything was algorithms, making that digital experience inside the car better than ever. So, for example, you approach your car, you no longer the key. No, we don't use keys anymore. We're using a card or some other facial ID. Just cars open up. Then you get in the car. How seamlessly can you move from your phone to the car? That's the biggest challenge facing automakers today. And then navigation, how quick and how accurate is navigation, infotainment. It's really become, when we're at home, we're on the couch flipping through our phone. When we're in the car, how is that interaction between all the digital components and the autonomous driving and the people inside the car? That's really the theme of the show. And to contrast that, if we went to an auto show 10 years ago, it was, how's the performance of this vehicle? How does it handle the corners, the braking, the acceleration, the fit and finish? What about the panel gaps? No one seems to be paying attention to that anymore. It's all about the digital experience, for better or for worse. I love driving cars, but I have to recognize that the world has moved on, and the younger generation loves that digital experience. So that was really the centerpiece of the show. Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, who makes the chips that power much of this digital experience, he was the keynote speaker. And it was like automakers are almost the new suppliers. It's the technologies at the top of the hill, automakers a notch down, and then your old school suppliers like Lear and Bosch and Denso are sort of hanging on. What about us? Is there a role for us in the future?
Yeah, no, it really is fascinating, and a great insight into the CES show, which did get a lot of coverage over here in the UK and Europe as well. And I'm sure some of those themes that you've already explored, Michael, will be returning to. But just staying with that topic of Chinese brands. So 2024 was very much the year when the Chinese brands ramped up their international operations, and we've seen that very much in the UK with a plethora of brands launching over certainly the last 18 months, and more coming this year. So we'll be talking specifically about some of the tariff issues in the US in a minute, but to set the scene, can you share what progress you think Chinese car makers have made so far in the US?
That's an easy one. It's sort of like they were speeding to get in here, preparing, meeting with dealers, doing consumer clinics, homologating their vehicles, several automakers, including the likes of BYD, a Great Wall, Chery, and others, and it's come to a screeching halt for two reasons. One is, as you know, last year the United States put in place 100% tariffs. That's a showstopper. Even if the Chinese are low cost, they just can't get around 100%. And then just yesterday, the Department of Commerce here announced that Chinese vehicles that feature Chinese hardware or software will not be allowed to be registered in the United States. I mean, there's like a huge billboard saying Chinese cars not welcome here. That's where they are. Doesn't mean the Chinese have given up. They still want to find a way in. Maybe they will with the new administration, but for the time being, you walk around and you don't see Chinese cars on American roads.
That's an interesting point, actually. So even with them launching into the US over recent years, you're not actually seeing many on the roads yourself.
The only ones I see are the ones that come across the border from Mexico. I live here in San Diego, just half an
Yeah.
hour from the border. Once in a while, we'll see a BYD or a Cherry or a Great Wall with Mexican plates. But that, and then of course, Volvo does have a plant in South Carolina, so the Volvos and Polestars are produced there. But gosh, what American consumer knows that Volvo is Chinese? If you take 1,000 of them, 999 would not.
Yeah.
So by and large, different from the UK, different from Europe, different from virtually every other market in the world. The United States is basically free of Chinese cars. We just don't have them here.
Well, I mean, following on from that point, what importance do you think the Chinese brands place on Europe at the moment?
Massive, massive. So give you a little bit of history, because I did spend a lot of time studying Chinese and Chinese history. During the Civil War, 1945 to 1949, Chairman Mao was battling Chiang Kai-shek, and Chairman Mao was in the countryside, Chiang was in the wealthy cities. Mao said, the way we're going to win this war is we're going to take all the countryside and encircle the cities and eventually overwhelm them. And today we can see exactly the same strategy playing out for the Chinese automakers as they go global. Number one, China last year exported 6 million cars worldwide, more than any other country. So they're number one, ahead of Japan and Germany. Number two, they're exporting to South America, to Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia, and now Europe. And Europe will be crucial. If they win in Europe, suddenly the United States and Canada find themselves on an island. So when I talk to Chinese automakers, their number one priority globally is, we want to win in Europe. We win in Europe, we'll be able to encircle and overwhelm the United States.
And Michael, you've followed the Chinese brands so closely. So I'm sort of interested to hear which Chinese brands have impressed you most in terms of the way they've launched into these new markets, and which ones do you think will emerge as the biggest players over time, especially in Europe?
That's a great question. And I'd love to be able to say, there's, just like in Japan, there's 5-6 automakers to watch, or in Korea, you got a couple, or in China has dozens and dozens of automakers. So you start to go, okay, which ones really matter? And today we can say with confidence that there's one that stands above the rest, and that's BYD.
Yeah.
The leading electric vehicle maker, China's number one market share in China market. Last year, they built and sold more than 4 million cars, surpassing Ford in size. In fact, this year they'll be bigger than Ford or Nissan or Honda globally.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. So what's their edge? They build their own batteries. They have their own battery supply chains. They do 70% of their components inside. So heavy vertical integration allows them scale and to knock down their costs. They're so vertically integrated, they even own their own roll-on, roll-off ships to take their cars to these markets globally.
Yeah.
So there's BYD is like call it, if you will, the Toyota of China today. They're just kicking it. And then you have a second tier of several companies that are pretty good, but not quite BYD class. So one of them would be Geely, we talked about earlier. They're the ones that own the Volvo brand, as well as Proton, Lotus. They have a joint venture with Mercedes to make the smart car. They're a force to watch. And they're, of course, they have the Volvo and Polestar brands. Lynk & Co. is also their brand in Europe. So Geely would be second. And then the third one, this is closer to home for you guys in the UK, of course, is MG brand, which is manufactured by SAIC, China's largest state-owned enterprise when it comes to making cars. So those would sort of be my big three. And then there's a lot of other ones that kind of require a college level course to decipher and understand. But those would be the three I'd recommend. Well, I'm sorry. Those are the three sort of today's big guys.
Yeah.
And then just briefly, we have what I call this techno gang of 5. These are the Tesla would like to be's out of China. And I'll just rattle off their names. We can't we don't need to go into them in depth, but their names are NIO, Xpeng, Li Auto, Xiaomi, which makes the smartphone, and Huawei, which also is big in telecommunications. Those are the 5 up and coming Teslas of China, still trying to get to scale to make money. Not there yet, but those are the ones to watch.
And Michael, the Chinese manufacturers have kind of been described as 3 funnels. You've got your state governed, controlled, owned. Then you've got your business sector, and some people say that BYD falls within that sort of the business area. And then you've got your tech ones, haven't you? Your smaller little startup techs. Is that how you see it? That it is those kind of three areas?
That's a great way of summing up a very complicated picture. If you look at a map of China, you'll see. Imagine Europe. You'll see Chinese automakers in every corner of Europe, and lots of names one wouldn't recognize. But to put them into categories would be great. There's these big 6 state enterprises. There's what we call the big 3 privates. That's Great Wall, BYD, and Geely. And then you have this, as you say exactly, you have this emerging group of technology companies, guys who made their billions in technology, like Elon Musk, now entering and disrupting the auto industry in China. Those 3 categories, great way to think about it.
And you mentioned US and the Chinese manufacturers, car makers earlier, and we've obviously got the Trump administration. I think he's been signed in on the 20th of January, if my memory serves me well. Mm-hmm. And obviously, there's all the hype about what tariffs are being imposed currently and what will happen once it's in. But you mentioned earlier that there is still a focus on the US for the Chinese manufacturers, but they've got quite a lot to go at with Australia and Europe and the UK and other markets, haven't they? And Asia and Thailand and things like that. How important do you think the US will be to the Chinese manufacturers in the future? Do you think it is something that they'll continue to push hard for, or do you think at the minute there's enough to go at?
Absolutely, it's their holy grail to hit the U.S. market. Why? Because at home, there's so much capacity that no one is making money at home. Growth is single digit. Price wars are fierce. Lots of them losing money. They look to the United States and say, if we can just get in there, we can make profits. So it remains a top priority for all of them. In fact, I was talking to one Chinese automaker last week, and they said, if President Trump said, we're welcome, we'd build 3 plants tomorrow. So they're on the periphery looking from the outside in going, my goodness, we just need to find a way to get in the United States. Under Trump, we can absolutely guarantee that he won't allow imports. What might happen is one morning, President Trump wakes up and goes, hey, I got an idea. Why don't I have BYD invest $3 billion, employ tens of thousands of Americans, bring their battery technology and set up a plant in Michigan? That's sort of the wild card everyone's watching.
And I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I think when you looked not so long ago in terms of Chinese manufacturing production, and then obviously the domestic market started to slow down and they had to sort of come out of China and look at, export, significant export. But actually they've started to demonstrate they are investing, they are buying plants, they are building plants, aren't they, in Europe, across Brazil, North America, to actually get around some of these challenges of distribution.
Yes, they're so pragmatic. They say, oh, that's the rule? Oh, I can't export? Okay, I'll build a plant. So we're seeing them in Brazil, in Thailand. I was just in Indonesia. They're building plants there. Where else? Hungary will be a big destination for Chinese plants. So they're saying, we get it. We can't just export from China forever. You want us to build transplants? We'll do that. Where do you want us to put them? So they're very aggressive. They understand they can't stay at home because they'll drown in their own overcapacity. China today has enough capacity to supply half of global demand for cars. Put some numbers to that. 45 million units of capacity. Domestic demand 25 million. That leaves a hefty 20 million. Where are we going to put these other 20 million? Yeah, they're coming out.
They're coming quickly, aren't they? Yeah. That's and to be fair, you mentioned Hungary there. They've got a fantastic trade relationship with Hungary, haven't they, in terms of investment and growth?
They do. It's their home away from home in Europe. The Hungarian leadership loves China, has great relationship there. It's highly unsettling, though, for Germany. Oh, you might not invest here in Germany or France. You're going to go to Hungary. Wait a second. Our industry is getting hollowed out, and we can't count on new investments. That's going to go elsewhere. That's a major drama. Major pressure right now.
Well, we'll be back with more from Michael after this short break.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on a special weekday episode of Motor Trade Radio, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising.
Welcome back. We're talking to leading industry commentator Michael Dunne in this special weekday podcast. Michael, turning to European battery production, I mean, you have spoken already about battery production, but there's some interesting recent developments here. So Sweden's Northvolt has gone from being touted as Europe's best hope for local battery production to actually seeking bankruptcy protection at the end of 2024. What's your view on the possible scenarios for the business?
Short answer, their investors include Volkswagen and others. And Volkswagen reportedly, I'm hearing, would arrange some kind of a partnership with one of China's leading battery makers. That would be a CATL or a BYD, where maybe it's a joint venture, maybe it's minority ownership. Northvolt lives another day and benefits from immediate access to world-class battery technology. The good news is Northvolt lives. The tougher news for Europe is we're not able to build an independent battery industry, at least not yet. We're still reliant on the Chinese, and that's a worry. That's a concern. We need to stand on our own, but we're not able to get there.
Because if Northvolt fails, I was going to ask you, who do you think will fill the void in Europe? But I think there's probably only one answer to that, isn't there?
Yeah, right. Look, if we step back and look at China has enough capacity. We're talking about capacity for cars. China has enough capacity today in batteries to supply all the world's demand. So, okay, you guys need how big a factory do you need? How soon? With what components you want? LFP chemistry, NCM chemistry. What do you want? We'll bring it tomorrow. Thank you very much. We'll be there. So China is able to step in. Also, the Koreans and the Japanese, the LGs, SKs, Samsungs are also active. It's just that when we look at overall competitiveness, the Chinese are dominant today and will be for the next 5 years until some other technology has a breakthrough. So Northvolt was such a promising company with such great leadership, and investors, smart investors, got in behind there, but it just wasn't to be. It was a bridge too far for them, and now look for them to sort of rely on Chinese technology to stay alive for the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of time, and we've not discussed Tesla, and we've not and current politics going on over in the US yet, so we better keep away from them. But let's go back to our opening chat about CES and obviously becoming that driving force of that tech market for the car makers. I mean, from your opinion, we're at the start of 2025. There's a lot going on. You know, the sector's shifting faster than it's ever shifted in decades now in terms of its evolution of powertrains, technology, etc. And you stated it right at the start there that car manufacturers now are becoming a supplier to tech businesses. The tech that's at the center of all of this. What do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities facing OEMs and dealers in 2025?
All right, let's take the dealers, especially with regards to Chinese automakers first, because that's an easier one. The good news for dealers around the world is that Chinese, with the exception of maybe NIO, all Chinese automakers I talk to say, we want to stick with the franchise model. We're not thinking about going direct. Why? They want to build advocates and allies on the ground in places like Europe, Canada, United States, South America, so that when it does get political, they could say, oh, we've got all kinds of friends nationwide, our dealer network. So on the dealer front, don't expect any rapid shift to direct to consumer in the next few years, at least when it comes from the Chinese. So that's one. The more complicated and tougher one is what happens to the automakers in this new world. So you guys are in the UK today, right? London?
Not quite, but
I'm just south.
Just south of London. Imagine like our friend from Kansas. You guys are now the managers of Manchester United. Yeah. Okay. And you've gotten a memo overnight and it said, oh, by the way, you guys, some of your players will be on the national team here out of the UK. It's confirmed 2026 World Cup will happen. We'll still call it the World Cup. But there's a slight little detail that we have to inform you about. We're going to play football. Yeah, we're going to play football, but it will be American football over there. Why? Well, because everyone agrees it's the future, and where our governments agree that's the future. We should definitely go and play American football. And you're scrambling. You're like, oh my God, American football. I have great athletes. Okay, we'll have a go. And then you start training, and you line up against a 330-pound offensive tackle from Atlanta, and you go, wait a second, or some guy who can lift 500 pounds at the bench, and you think this is a totally different game. And soccer or football has been we've been supreme in it forever. And now you're going to ask us to play a different game?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I didn't sign up for this. And yet here we are. And the game in China is electric. Half of new car sales are electric. European automakers getting hammered there. Just a mess. Losing not thousands of sales, not hundreds of thousands of sales year on year, going down. So it used to be a profit machine. It's now red ink and a really brutal marketplace. And it looks like the beginning of the end for many European automakers in China. So I don't know if the analogy is perfect, but you guys get the idea. We've moved into a new realm where technology is king, and you're going, but wait a second, we're the very best in designing engineering engines powered by gasoline or diesel. And the best you'll get is kind of a shrug. Yeah, that was great 10 years ago. That's the new reality.
And do you think, I suppose who knows yet? It's the game of poker. What who will win, who will lose? I mean, there's so much going on in there at the minute that your incumbent, your legacy OEMs are trying to work all this out. Your Chinese OEMs are forging ahead at full speed, aren't they?
Yes. Well, Honda, Nissan. Who would have imagined that? Honda, fiercely independent. Honda, the master of gasoline, getting together with Nissan. No, this can't be true. Oh, yeah, it is. Why is it a measure? Is it a movement of strength? No, it's like a little bit panic. And the Japanese government was definitely involved, directing those two companies to get together, saying, for national security purposes, we don't want to lose our industrial base. We have to find a way to survive. You guys get together and figure it out. So we'll see more of that.
There's lots of. I think we'll get you back on at some point in the future, Michael. I think there's so much going on. Like I say, we've not touched on half of it, and probably the Tesla story is probably a whole podcast of conversation of get your views on Elon Musk and Tesla and where they play in the future. I mean, for me, just finally, it's fascinating to have you on. It's great to eventually speak to you. And like I say, I think anybody that isn't following you in the social space or listening to your Driving With Dunne podcast, then they certainly need to be tuning into that on a regular basis. Just the guests and the knowledge that you share and the conversations that you have are fascinating and things like that. So what is the best way for the listeners to get hold of you or follow what you do? You're on LinkedIn, obviously, and you're on all the social channels as well, aren't you? As well as what the Driving With Dunne.
Yes. Easiest is www.dunneinsights.com. There you can access the newsletter, see the podcast episodes, and also get a feel for our services. We advise investors, automakers, and suppliers on the future, what's coming next, autonomous, electric, AI, as this, changes in the industry just seem to accelerate week to week. No pause.
No, fantastic, man. I mean, wish you all the best. At least try and get a little bit of downtime before you head off, I presume, to New Orleans and NADA on the 23rd, I think it is.
That's right. Next week.
Get a few more sort of steps in on your there, won't you, as well? But we wish you all the best. Fascinating insight. Thank you for taking the time out and talking to us today, Michael. It has been an absolute pleasure and very much appreciated.
Gentlemen, thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Oh, many thanks, Michael. Great conversation there. I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. But unfortunately, that's all for now. We're back with the headlines on Saturday. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. Philip and Curtis will be back with the week's big motor retailing headlines on Saturday. Live, on demand, wherever you are, on your podcast feed.